Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
There's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. This is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Mr. Secretary, I'm somewhat puzzled. I grew up in Virginia, where Robert E. Lee was revered. I think when I was a kid, his birthday was a school holiday. But as I grew older and learned more about American history, I learned that he fit the classic definition of a traitor. He took up arms against his country. He broke his oath as a member of the United States Army, which he took upon entering his career at West Point. Why are you going through these incredible gymnastics, finding current soldiers or other soldiers to rename? And you slipped a minute ago. You said we're returning these bases to their original names. Robert E. Lee, leading general of the Confederacy, Pickett, the other names. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what the motivation is to rename bases for people who took up arms against their country on behalf of slavery. What possible motivation can there be for this? Who is telling you to do this? Who is urging you to do this?
Senator, the veterans and service members across the country who have deployed from Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or Fort Hood or Fort Pickett, there's a legacy, there's a connection to those bases and to those places, to what they trained for there, what they did for, and what they came home back to. That matters to them. Ask enough of them, as I do, all the time, before and later. And we recognize the service of those who were put into the replacement. No one's disputing that. I would never dispute that. What we're looking at is erasing history, erasing names, erasing base names that service members are tied to.
Talk
to people that serve at Bragg. Ask people that serve at Fort Bragg or Fort Benning if they like the fact that the names have been returned. And to a man and to a woman, they will tell you, thank God we're back to Fort Bragg, and thank God we're back. And thankfully, because so many men and women in this country have served, there's a Benning and a Bragg and a Pickett and a Hood has a Silver Star or a Medal of Honor that we could rename the base to because of the limits of what Congress allowed us to do. So this is something we've been proud to do, something that's important for the morale of the Army, and those communities appreciate that we've returned it back to what it was instead of trying to play this game of erasing names.
We're not erasing history, Mr. Secretary. We're recognizing history and recognizing that mistakes have been made in this country. The greatest of all was the Civil War, where people took up arms against their country on behalf of the institution of slavery. And to continue the practice of recognizing those people and honoring them by the naming of these bases is, I believe, an insult to the people of the United States. Let me talk about the budget. I don't understand why the budget is coming to us in two pieces. Why not give us an honest base budget instead of putting a piece of it in recognition, in reconciliation? As I understand it, OMB is saying we're going to have a flat defense budget for the next 4 or 5 years. Are we planning reconciliation every year from now on? Why not give us an honest budget, telling us what your priorities are, and then we can consider it. This committee always works in a bipartisan basis on the defense budget. We all want to see some increases in the defense budget, and yet you're giving us this, this fake, here's a piece of the budget, here's another. You're cutting, in the base budget, you're cutting shipbuilding in half and saying, well, we're going to make it up in reconciliation. Are we going to have reconciliation every year, which basically, by the way, puts a significant part, 10 or 15% of the defense budget, in a wholly partisan decision-making process, whereas in the history of this committee, it's always been bipartisan. Why are we doing it this way?
Senator, from our view, the budget number 961 meets the requirements and threats that we face. And
That's not the number. The number is 892.6. You're adding reconciliation. That's my whole point. Why not give us a base budget of 961 or whatever the right number is, what you consider the right number, and then we can operate and make our decisions. Why do it in this bifurcated way that really is fooling the American people about what the defense budget is?
We're not trying to fool anybody, sir. It's two bills, one budget.
Haven't asked my
We're
question
working with
yet. Why is it
OMB,
being
and
done
we feel
this
very
way?
comfortable
Why
with
is it
the
being
number of
done this way?
961 billion.
Why don't you give us a straight-up budget for the Defense Department? That's my question.
Senator, this is a straight-up budget for the Defense Department, and it's a
It is not.
13% increase over what Joe Biden
It is a
gave us.
two-part defense budget. Part of it is in reconciliation instead of in the budget that's being presented to this committee. This committee only has a partial review of the budget. I don't understand why we can't have an honest, straightforward budget instead of this son of Oko that you're putting over on us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank each of you for being here, and I want to thank you for your dedication to the country, each of you. Secretary,
Senator Mullen.
Talk about accountability. I wonder who was held accountable for the disastrous withdrawal out of Afghanistan, where 13 soldiers died, and we left thousands of Americans behind underneath Secretary Austin's lead. Did one person get held accountable during that time? I don't know of anybody that got held accountable for Afghanistan withdrawal. But let's talk about that. And let's talk about the turmoil to which my colleagues on the other side of the dais wants to talk about. Let's talk about that turmoil. Underneath Secretary Austin, who was a general, by the way, you had the lowest morale measured in our military history. You had retention absolutely disastrous. You had recruitment that wasn't even meeting lowered standards that you guys lowered. But let me see the contrast now. We have the highest morale that's been measured in decades in the military. We have recruiting numbers that are exceeding expectations that we've had. We have our enemies that fear us once again, and our allies that love us because they can trust us. But that's not the narrative, Secretary Hegseth, that our Democrat colleagues want to draw. But how short-minded is your memory? It was just a few months ago that you was supporting a commander-in-chief that you guys were covering up for or flat out lying about. Who was in charge? And that was a commander-in-chief. Oh, but let's not talk about that. Instead, let's just point fingers at something that fits a narrative. You want to talk about war powers or the fact that during our reposturing in the Middle East against Iran, which would have never taken place if our colleagues on the other side would have held the administration accountable while they were giving billions of dollars back to Iran and knowing good and well during the briefings that they were actually trying to develop a nuclear weapon, but we turned a blind eye to that, and now the mess that was created by the Biden administration, this administration, or the Trump administration, and the leadership of Secretary Hegseth is simply trying to clean up. But forget about the past. Let's talk about this. Oh, let's talk about reposturing, by the way. And wasn't it Secretary of the Navy, Del Toro, that came to us and said that he was fighting the largest naval battle since World War II? Did anybody in this dais authorize that? That was his words, who sat right there where Secretary Hegseth was, and I laughed. And I said, I didn't think the Houthis had a Navy, so why are we fighting a naval battle there? And did you guys complain about it? Did you guys say one thing about it? Nope. You just sat there because, hey, it didn't fit your narrative, but this one does. And then you want to start talking about the National Guard and the Marines. Didn't President Eisenhower deploy troops or federalized troops in Arkansas in 1957 and also deploy the 101st Airborne because the governor then refused to protect civil rights and personal property? Yep. What about President Kennedy in 62 and 63 that also did it because Mississippi and Alabama refused to do the same thing? And so since the governor at that time refused to protect citizens and the property, he federalized the National Guard. Oh, let's think about 65 too, because LBJ did the exact same thing. But that's history. But yet it's extremely important to the context of what you guys are claiming to be done here. But that doesn't fit the narrative that you guys want to put out there. History is history. Look back at it if you want to or not. But keep in mind, every time you're pointing fingers here, you got 3 fingers pointing back at you. Because the previous administration, you guys 100% turned a blind eye to and did nothing to hold them accountable. Nothing. So don't sit up here on the dais and pretend like you're trying to hold administration accountable now because you didn't for 4 years. You literally covered up for a commander-in-chief that was absent. Absent-minded and absent leadership. And you guys did absolutely nothing. Even your left-leaning media is saying it was the worst cover-up possibly in political history. Yet nothing from you guys. You all should be ashamed of yourself. Literally, you should be ashamed of yourself. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen.